Well, hello, everybody. This is Wilson Cole, of course, president of Adams, Evans, and Ross and Backdoor Hiring Solutions. And I almost feel like I've done something to get in trouble because I have on our podcast not one attorney that you all know, Samantha, but I have two attorneys, barristers, solicitors. I have with us Luke Menzies, and he is our legal, it was a solicitor, barrister, partner over in the UK on backdoor hires. He is the go-to guy over in the UK whenever you find a backdoor hire. Luke, can you kind of give me an overview and also kind of correct is it a solicitor or barrister? I think you said that you're a barrister as well.
Hi, Wilson. Yeah. I'm both, which is quite rare in the UK. But I like collecting badges. So I was barristers are self-employed, and that's what I did for a few years. But if you want to own and run a law firm, you have to become a solicitor. So that's what I did 10 years ago. In fact, we celebrated the 10 years anniversary of our firm just last week. So that's great. We did a lot of employment law, labor law, but also we have a niche in recruitment, fee disputes, backdoor hires, as you describe it. So it's really great to be working with you on this, and I definitely see us as your sort of UK counterpart.
Yeah. Well, you guys are the go-to guys over there, and that's for sure. And with the backdoor hiring system, we're always keeping our ear to the ground, and like I said, you are just the authority that we utilize repeatedly over there. So any of our UK clients, if you should ever have one of our backdoor hires that are located through our systems, and the debtor is not going to pay you, we're going to give you the ability to reach out to Luke and give him. I tell you what, Luke, what do you have? If somebody wanted to reach out to you before we get into the details, how would they get in contact with you if they had a backdoor hire or something along those lines here in the UK?
I can give my email address. It's very simple: luke@menzieslaw.co.uk, or you can go to our website, which is simply www.menzieslaw.co.uk.
Okay.
And you'll find us there.
Well, outstanding. Well, I know we've got a lot of questions that I'd like to know as well, because of course we've been over here in the U.S. for 27 years. We've only been over there in the UK with backdoor hires for about 3 with the software platform, and it amazes me. And for recruiters that think backdoor hires happen, but they happen to someone else, I can tell you they happen to you. They happen to you here in the U.S. They happen to you over there in the UK as well. So. Oh, yeah. Let's go ahead and jump into the questions. Luke, kind of give me a typical backdoor hire issue that you run into there in the UK. What would be the typical backdoor hire?
It's probably identical to what you have. So the typical one is recruitment agency introduces a candidate, gets their terms of business across, and then the client goes, "That's very interesting," and then it all goes quiet. And then a few months later, the recruitment agency finds out this guy was hired, and they knew nothing about it. So very much the same as you, I'm sure.
Okay.
And the same sort of excuses as well.
And that was my question. What's the top 3 or 4 excuses that you run into? What's the number one excuse when somebody's caught with that backdoor hire? What do they tell you?
Yeah. So number one is probably, we didn't realize we owed you a fee because we went quiet for a bit, and then we found them again on LinkedIn, and then we had a chat. So it's just denying that there was a proper introduction. Probably number 2 is, we didn't read your terms of business. Or we didn't receive them, when of course they did.
Okay.
Another common one is, they were introduced by another agency next week, the week after.
Okay.
And another one is, we sort of knew them already.
Okay. Yep. That by the way is the number one excuse here in the U.S. is we already knew the candidate, and that's one of the things that we always find interesting, because knowing the candidate and knowing that they're looking for a job are 2 very different things. I'm assuming there in the UK the laws are going to be very similar to that.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
Okay. Now, what is the absolute worst thing that a recruiter can do? Let's say they find a backdoor hire, they get notified from our system, and it says, they check it out, and it's like, you know what, that's a backdoor hire. What is the worst thing that they could do initially to damage their case, and what would you recommend once they find that backdoor hire? How would you suggest they handle it there in the UK?
Oh, it's an interesting question. What's the worst thing they could do? I'm not sure. I guess do anything that sort of indicates that they aren't confident that the fee is due. It could be say, oh well, possibly sort of suggest that perhaps it wasn't really them that they introduced it, or possibly say something which suggests that they're up for doing a deal, which again suggests they're not really confident that they're owed the money. There's all sorts of little things they can do or say. Whereas my advice is always just be really clear that these are your terms, the facts fit your terms, the guy's been hired, and your money is due. So being really, really simple, straight about it, and not trying to waffle, not feeling embarrassed and therefore saying something that then puts them in a weak position. Sometimes just saying, well, perhaps we could do a deal is also weak, because it suggests immediately that the recruitment agency is somehow feeling in a weak spot.
Okay.
And I know it's often nerves and anxiety that make people do that. Unfamiliarity with the world of law or with enforcing a debt. But often it can really, really lose them the psychological advantage.
Yeah.
And I'm sure you agree. And then the debtor suddenly feels that they can take the advantage and try and either get out of it, or at least try to offer a really small amount if they're willing to have a deal.
Okay. Samantha and I, back a few podcasts ago, did an episode of "You Have the Right to Shut Up," and the theory was, when they tell you they're not going to pay you, at that point in any conversation, because anything that you can say going forward is going to be a misstatement. I'm always surprised, when clients sometimes can get emotional. They say stuff that if you look at it from a different light, could interpret a much weaker case. So if they present it, and we find, and do you find the same thing when they find a backdoor hire here in the U.S.? We find that about half of the companies, when the recruiter goes back, they're again very direct. Here, here's our invoice. We're owed a fee. That is about half of them will pay, half of them won't. First, is that about the same average that you find there, or do you find that they need to get attorneys involved a little more often over there, or less often?
I think, yeah, that sounds familiar. Every case is different.
Okay.
But I'd say, yeah, that's fairly familiar. There are some that just don't want to fight, and there are others that are outraged they should have to pay anything. But it's mock outrage usually. There are a few who are really, really innocent or naive and just clearly didn't know what they were getting into. They're very small businesses, owner managed, and they may just sort of wander through life rather naively and say, I had no idea. I never read these things. I've got too much to do. Oh, it's all terrible. Woe is me. You big nasty recruiter, you. We pay you guys too much anyway,
One of my favorites is when they think it's like a coffee shop punch card of, well, we paid for the last 3, so there's no reason we're needing to pay for this 4th.
And of course, a regular one is, but they only stayed for 3 weeks and they were useless.
Well, and that kind of brings me up, because it amazes me the similarities, the same similarities that you guys run into in the UK are the exact same similarities that we run into here in the U.S. and in Canada. So you're talking about, with the terms of business, what are the best safeguards there in the UK to make sure that you put in those terms of business? And in a general overview, what, from a collection standpoint, what would you recommend having in those terms of business to protect against these backdoor hires?
Yeah. Well, in terms of actually making sure the terms of business are effective between the two companies, then the perfect world is signed, an ink signature. That isn't a requirement of law here. All you've got to do is prove it to a judge that there's been an agreement. So nowadays in the UK, the recruitment agency will send their terms, usually in a PDF attachment to the email, separate to the candidates' resumes, and will simply say, if they're clever, they'll say in the email, we've attached our terms of business that will apply if you read these CVs. Sometimes they don't say that, but the terms of business themselves say these apply if you read the CVs and take any action. So often the dispute is looking carefully at what were the terms sent, were they referred to in the email, and often we find that although the debtor is refusing to accept that they remember being sent them, what you then find is there's been some email discussion about the amount of fee, there's been the percentage, there's a bit of negotiation. At which point it must be clear to everyone, including any judge looking at it, that of course they know what the deal is because they've then tried to negotiate. Okay. And so that's a great way of being clear that they do know what's going on. So it's making sure that there's proof that the terms of business have been sent and that the client knows that a fee is due. Okay. As to what the terms of business need to say, probably very similar to you really. They need to be really clear that, for a certain period after the introduction, if this candidate is hired, then no matter what, the fee will be paid. Okay. There may be some exceptions which the agency is willing to have, or some reductions, some tapering provision, but just really clear rule that no matter what, if the introduction happens and then the hire happens within 6 months, 12 months, whatever, then the fee will be due no matter what. And that's really important because that no matter what can then cover another agency coming in and reintroducing the client. Okay. Which is an area of big dispute otherwise.
Now, with the possessory period here in the U.S., it's typically 12 months. Is the possessory period typically 6 months, 12 months? What's kind of that industry average over there?
I'd say 6 to 12. It really depends from agency to agency. Okay. And in the UK here, we'd call it a restrictive covenant. So it's a promise not to do something for a certain period.
Okay. Well, that's so restrictive of covenants. Okay. Now, if I heard what you said correctly, you can enforce contracts over there that aren't signed as long as the term they use, and Sam, correct me if I'm wrong, but basically meeting of the minds is kind of the understanding here. I'm sure Sam has some legal terms that.
Yeah. Right. Yeah, you've got to show that there was probably the same in the US. You tend to show that there's terms of business were offered and they were accepted. Okay. So we talk about offer and acceptance. You prove those two things, and then you prove the meeting of minds. There's a nice bit of Latin, consensus ad idem, which is a consensus is reached, and it's I think in the law books you tend to call it proving the incorporation of terms, i.e. you've brought the terms, incorporated them into the relationship. Okay. So if I'm doing shorthand, I tend to write incorporation of terms, and then I can tick the box when I can see it's there clearly from the emails that have been sent backs and forwards. Okay.
One, without going into too much detail, if somebody, and I know half of them are going to pay before they come to you. If we find somebody, then half of them are going to pay. The other half that don't pay, clients want to go ahead and elevate, they're going to come to you. Most of them are going to settle because they do the same thing here in the U.S. But there are going to be some that are going to dig their heels in, and they're going to say, okay, go ahead and sue me. What is just an overview? Is it a 5-month process, 10-month process? How long does it take to get your typical, $15,000, £20,000 recruiting fee adjudicated through the system there?
I'd say 6 to 12 months.
Okay.
It depends. We have a small claims process here that you probably do in States and US, which can be quicker, in which case could be 2 or 3 months. If you're lucky, if the judges are available. It depends on the amount of money, but generally I'd say 6 to 12. And of course, as you mentioned, very few actually need to litigate. The reality is that I don't think we've actually had one that's actually had to go to court yet. No, we've got a 100% success rate of out-of-court settlements. Or occasionally our client will decide they don't want to spend the money and they'll back off, but that's very rare.
Okay. Well, that I tell you what, like I said, you're the man there in the UK. So that is, so as our clients find these backdoor hires, the first thing, and I'm kind of paraphrasing, is if you find somebody, be very direct. Send them the invoice. Don't give them any waffling room, and don't offer to negotiate or anything along those lines. Be very precise. If they don't pay, then I'm assuming, that the thing that I've always told my clients is, as soon as they say they're not going to pay you, you need to end all conversation. It doesn't really matter why. After that, if they're asking for documentation, they're not looking at the documentation to get you paid. They're more looking at the documentation on how to build a case in a defense on not getting you paid. So would your suggestion be the same thing when they say
you bet.
They're not going to pay you, it's to give you a call?
Absolutely.
Okay. Well, Luke, I know it's getting later over there in the UK, so we'll wrap up this session. But I just wanted to introduce you to our UK clients and let you know that you have a magnificent resource. There's some neat benefits that you get from going through Luke's office, other than the fact that you get some absolutely wonderful service there. And Luke is the guy on the backdoor hire. So if Luke's given you his information, if you didn't catch it, you can contact us through the email that you've been notified on that backdoor hire. We'll put you directly in contact with Luke. Luke, is there anything that you would like to say as far as in closing that maybe I didn't cover? Or Sam?
You're a consummate professional, Wilson. I think you've done this before.
We have been locating backdoor hires in some form or fashion, or collecting on them here in the U.S. for about 10 years. We noticed about 5 or 6 years ago just this huge surge where they were increasing about 200 and 400% increases, and that's when we developed the backdoor hire. So yeah, it's it keeps us busy, and like I said, I'm excited to have a partner over there with our clients that we can refer over to, because I know half of them that we find with the backdoor hiring solutions are going to pay, but the other half are not. And so I want to make sure that our clients have a way to recover their funds. Now, you work solely in the UK. Is that the jurisdiction? Is there anywhere else outside the UK?
Yeah. It's England and Wales. England we cover. If there's a Scotland case, we can possibly have a go again. If we keep it out of court, then we can do it. If it's Scottish courts, I can bring in someone else to help. So the main jurisdiction, England and Wales, which of course is almost where everything falls. If there's anything exotic like Jersey or Guernsey or Isle of Man or Northern Ireland, I can find someone to help there too.
Well, it sounds to me like your network is very similar to us here in the U.S. as we have, in each of the states, there's, here in the U.S., the states are each law is a little bit different. So we have attorneys in each of those states. It sounds like you have a very similar network. Well, Luke, I appreciate you joining us. Samantha, is there anything that you wanted to add, or did that?
I think we've covered it all. Luke was talking about Wilson's done this a time or two. I won't get into that working in backdoor hires may be his favorite child, but that can be another time.
That's not necessarily true, but it does keep me busier than most. Well, Luke, thank you, and we'll set up another podcast in the future, and we will go from there. Thanks again for joining us.
Really.